And would you just say your name and your organization?
Yes. So, hi everybody, I'm Wendy Wiegmann. I'm with Simpson Housing Services. So we are going to be the service provider at Calvary. I would stand up there, but so I figured I met with Sherry probably a month or two ago now to talk about what is going to happen and what Simpson is going to be doing at the new home of Calvary. And so we agreed that I would come today as a start. So Simpson Housing Services, I'll just give you a quick overview of who we are, what we do. We were founded in the Whittier neighborhood out of the Simpson United Methodist Church in 1982. It was that winter, this is the lore of the church, was that winter there were a lot of people sleeping on their steps, and the church folk were like, we need to do something about this. And so while the men were downtown talking to the city council, the women opened the doors of the church and let people in. So that's the lore. I choose to believe it, I think. So the church opened. It's been a shelter ever since that time. In '93, we became a separate nonprofit from the church and have been around since then. Today we serve, we have the original shelter. We've moved temporarily to a different home because we're hoping to rebuild. In 2019, the Simpson United Methodist Church went out of regular worship and they donated the building to us so that we can maintain the shelter on that site, which is lovely. So we've been working for the last 5 years to raise the money to be able to tear down the church and rebuild it into a shelter and housing of our own. We just got the last amount of money from the state, and so we're going to be moving forward on that project probably by the end of the year. So we're really excited. It's going to be a new shelter meant for people not in the basement of a church, and 42 units of housing for people who are chronically homeless. It's a 2740 First Avenue South. So if you know where like Rainbow Chinese is, it's in the parking lot behind there. So we're very excited about our own project, and it's been, I think I've been with Simpson since 1998. And I think we've been talking about rebuilding the shelter since that time. So we're very excited about that. So we've temporarily moved to Zion Lutheran Church. When they were closing last year, we were looking for a temporary home for our shelter guests and for our shelter, and it just worked out really great that at the exact time they were vacating that we were able to move in there, and we actually purchased the church and more to come on that site at some point. So today we have that original shelter, and then we expanded to serve individuals in housing and families in housing. We started serving families in housing in 1984. We were, again, the folks at the church started seeing families coming in, sleeping on the basement floor, and decided we need to do something about this. And so they started one of the first transitional housing programs for families in the state. So we've been serving families ever since that time, have been gradually growing our programs. We now work with about 300 families with close to 700 kids a year. The way we work with families in that is we use both time-limited housing as well as long-term housing. Calvary is long-term housing. So for time-limited, it's just mostly as a rapid rehousing, so people or transitional housing. We take people that are staying in shelter, we move them into housing, we provide services, and at some point we step away. The family is in the community and doesn't need our support anymore. For long-term housing, it's for people that maybe need a little more, not a time limit, where it's at the time limit of the person or the family. We also work with single individuals. We work with close to 250 single individuals now, mostly women. It's a specifically targeted to women program, and it's kind of a similar model. We take people that are homeless or unhoused and move them into housing and provide services. So that's kind of the broad overview of Simpson. So a couple of years ago now, you all were in conversation about what was gonna happen next for Calvary, and Trellis was working on it, and we work with Trellis on several other projects, other housing projects where we're the service provider. And so they reached out to us and we're like, hey, we're working on this project. Would Simpson consider being the service partner on this? And we got really excited about that because it's in our community, it's in our neighborhood, and it's such a need. And so the way we generally provide services is, so there's something called housing support, which is a state funding. So it's targeted for people with long-term homeless status and disabilities. And so they were gonna set aside units for people experiencing homelessness with those needs. I think it's 15 units there. I think 6 families and 9 single individuals will come through that. But then they had Section 8 on the rest of the building, and they asked us if we would consider providing some additional services to the rest of the residents, and so we thought that would be a really great idea. It's a little bit outside of our model. Like generally we work with people just experiencing homelessness and kind of case management, but seeing the need, we have some in other programs where we do resident engagement, so we thought it would be a really nice fit. So they were able to figure out some operating funds to pay for a staff person to do that. So so there's going to be kind of 2 ways that people will get into Calvary, into the apartments. So for the 15 units that are long-term for people experiencing homelessness, they will come through something called coordinated entry. Are you guys familiar with that at all? Okay. So years ago, the county established a system for people that are experiencing homelessness to try to figure out how to prioritize those folks that need more support versus people that maybe just need affordable housing or that kind of thing. So people with some disabilities or some other needs. So when people come into shelters or through street outreach or through other teams, they can get an assessment for coordinated entry, and then they get on the priority list, and then their name, when there's an opening at a project, we would let coordinated entry know, hey, we have an opening, we need one person for this 1 bedroom or a family of 2, and they'll send us a person or a family, and we'll do an intake and move them in.
Question.
Yes.
So, and this has come from the community because, you know, I'm hearing from people that want to live in the housing, and they don't all have outreach workers, and they're not connected in that way. So a question from the community is, how can people get connected if they don't have that resource?
So they're currently unhoused.
Yeah.
There is a way to get through the Hennepin County front door. So they're supposed to be able to do an assessment, and I can send you the number to that.
Okay.
We can also connect them with an outreach worker because there's so many outreach teams. We could get them connected.
Yeah.
For those.
Yeah, if we could connect outreach workers with people, that'd probably be.
Because they would just come.
Yeah.
To them. And you know it. Yeah.
What is the length of the process to get connected to the service tank? You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's quite a few outreach teams now. They've really expanded. The county does a lot of their own outreach, as well as there's organizations that do outreach. So it doesn't take very long to get somebody connected if they can find them. Right now, the length of time on the priority list is really just depends on whether, honestly, is whether we can find them or not. We get a lot of referrals for people that are we're ready to go, we have a unit vacant, but then the outreach team that worked with them, they were at this encampment, and then that encampment got closed, and so our staff are constantly trying to find people so that's probably our biggest barrier right now. But we have a pretty connected system where we call each other and say, hey, have you seen Joe? Well, last time I saw him, he was here, and our staff are pretty dogged about going wherever they need to do to find people. So.
And at one point there was talk about there being preference for people that lived in the area. Is that still something that's
Yeah,
gonna happen?
we've done that before when we do so for the coordinated entry part of it, we've requested it in the referral form. Like we would prefer to have somebody in a zip code, or if there's a particular affinity group, like we'll put, we prefer women, or we prefer, there was one project where they were preferring East African folks, and so we kind of had put that preference. So sometimes the coordinated entry people will look at that and say, oh yeah, this person's on the list, they live here, or they, you know, this is their neighborhood, let's refer them there. So there's some human element to it, it's not kind of an automated system. Yeah.
And maybe just sort of adding on to that, I mean, I think one of the parts of Calvary being partnering with the community and being really a part of the community is being some of is sort of liaising with and coordinating with. And so, I mean, as you're talking about finding people, I'm even thinking about different people in the square that we have close contact with that could help to coordinate to make sure that you can find some of these people.
Yeah.
Because some of that referral actually might come through them.
Yeah.
And so, and that builds onto the idea of preference or like priority for those who are in the community. I think, you know, being that part of our mission is being a part of our community and the partnership that we have with it, wondering if Simpson and Trellis would sort of be on board with that too, and that we could help to team around connecting with the priority of residents who are there looking for housing.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. I think once we get, well, they keep saying September.
I don't know, nobody believes it.
They keep saying September, and every time, because I drive by Calvary all the time because it's my neighborhood, or it's in my neighborhood, and so I'm always like, how is this going to be done by September?
The person from Trellis, I talked to a Trellis rep on Friday, and she said the latest estimates that they're working on now is that they have certificates of occupancy for the new construction, September 26th, or something like that. And for the historic building, the first week in October.
Awesome.
So that's not building done, that's certificate of occupancy, which means not that people are moving in, but that this was Sarah Olson, who deals with furnishings and other things. That's when they could start moving things in to make the units ready and other things. So anyway, that's not when we get to move in, and you need to put that clarification out. But again, that end of September, early October time continues to be the time frame that Trellis is operating and construction is proceeding on schedule for that.
And piggybacking on what Scott was saying about engaging with the community, it'd be great if outreach workers or you could come to one of the morning meetings that happen in the square. They're every day, every morning at 8 a.m., every evening at 7 p.m.
Yeah, 8 and 7.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, so Trellis and Simpson need to get on board or on the same page. Usually what happens is about 90 days before occupancy or before they're wanting to start moving people in, we start having weekly conversations or bi-weekly conversations about referrals and process for lease up and all of those kinds of things. So we start requesting referrals because we don't want to start too soon or lose people. But
Yeah.
Trellis will have definitely a time frame in which they're going to need to move people in, because with the funding they get, they have a certain time where like they lose money if they don't have a lease up, usually within 90 days of the certificate of occupancy. So in that time frame, we'll be more regularly meeting about both the 15 units that are set aside for people experiencing homelessness, as well as the rest of the units, which Trellis will be responsible for leasing up.
Are the apartments designed for single men, single women, or just families?
It's a mix. So I think they have, I don't know the mix off the top of my head, but I think it's 0, like efficiency units, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, and some 3 bedrooms. So for the fifth, and a couple floors.
I think there's 1 4 and a couple of 3s, but then all the way down the studio.
Yeah. And so for the 15 units that will be set aside for homeless folks, 9 of those are gonna be for single individuals, so the zeros, I call them zeros, the efficiencies or the 1-bedroom units. And then I think it's mostly 2 bedrooms that, for the 6 families. And then the rest are Section 8, so it's a subsidy through Minnesota Public Housing Authority. So the rest of those units, I think they're targeting the larger units for those subsidies because you get more money and families need more assistance.
So if there's Section 8, then there's a huge list of people for the Section 8.
Yeah, so we just met with, Trellis and Simpson met with MPHA probably a month ago, kind of to talk about some of the processes that they would have. And I know this is like Trellis's area, so I don't want to like speak too much out of turn, but what Minnesota Public Housing said in that meeting is that they can keep kind of their own waiting list for those units. So they'll be able to take names for the waiting list from people in the community.
Oh.
So they'll get some people through the waiting list through Minneapolis Public Housing, but those particular vouchers, they'll be able to fill some of those units from.
Right. That's good. I got grandmas talking to me, so that's good to
Yeah,
hear.
so I think it would be really good once Trellis, I think we have another meeting with MPHA in a couple weeks. Like, I'm assuming Trellis is gonna come out with like, okay, this is the process, this is how we're gonna get people, they're gonna have like a phone call or do something. I think that's part of the conversation about how do we make sure that folks from the community get on this list and are able to move in.
I have a quick question. I haven't rented for like a gazillion years, but I understand that in the city of Minneapolis, you can only have so many family members in an apartment, depending on the size of the apartment. Is that going to hold true in this situation also?
Yeah, there's occupancy limits, but they're pretty, yeah, it is Minneapolis. That is true.
I mean, because there's so many people that have the larger family that
Yeah.
could fit themselves into a 4-bedroom.
Yeah, it's surprising what they consider a living unit. So like a living room is considered a space where somebody can sleep.
Oh,
So those
okay.
occupancy limits usually for like a efficiency is like 2 people. For
Okay.
a 1-bedroom, I think sometimes it's like close to 3.
Oh, okay. So
they
it's a
kinda
little
go
more
from
generous
there.
than
It's
just
not
how many
just like-
bedrooms.
Yeah, it's not like it's just 1 bedroom, you get 1 person. So sometimes, yeah, we have families that will put in families of 3.
And then I'm always a logistics person. If, I know that people that are going in on the Section 8 have probably lived somewhere else and have their own things. People just coming in from generational homelessness, how do you work out, how do we get a bed in here or a chair or a table or whatever? What does that come through?
Yeah, I was actually gonna say that is probably a potential way we could build some, with Calvary, we could probably build some engagement around with the residents. For the homeless units, that source of funding has a little bit of money, so it comes with a rental amount that also includes some money to be able to buy furnishings or some basic needs kinds of things. It's not generally enough in the beginning, so like a couple $100 a month that we have in somebody's budget to help buy stuff. But you know, when you move into a place, it's very expensive to get spices and all that kind of stuff. So usually what we do is we have like a welcome home basket or something like that we put together for people when they first move into housing in those units. And I think part of the planning is trying to figure out with Trellis and with others, like how do we put something together for everybody that moves in, so that they have some basics.
Because I'm kind of wondering in my head if Calvary folks could connect with Simpson to say, okay, I have this table, or I know someone who has a table, or is that, you know, I know you want to avoid getting junk, because that's not nice, but just a way to connect with you guys and Trellis on making sure that needs are met. Okay.
There's definitely good connections with Buy Nothing groups,
Mm-hmm.
the Bancroft one, and then the Corcoran Powderhorn Central one, and people who, in those groups who are working on trying to get stuff to the people who actually need it.
Yeah.
Cause a lot of times Buy Nothing is, you know, middle class giving to middle class kind of.
Right.
So, I'm not volunteering to be that coordinator, but I think it would be a fantastic thing for someone to help coordinate, is to, you know, have wish lists and put it out there, and there's a lot of people with extra stuff out there, and people who are moving and all that.
Or some of us ourselves, some of us probably have more stuff than we need, that we could.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question
Why are you looking?
You know some?
sort of related to this, and that is, on this welcome visit, or what you're doing in welcome, I know, I'm very familiar with that. I live in a condo with people of different incomes and backgrounds, but my wife, being the chair of the social committee, she also made sure that they get a visit when they move in, and one of the things that the visitor does is tells them about what's happening in the building. And in our case, what's happening is a book study, it's use of the exercise center, it's an opportunity for people to get together and talk about their building and kind of be a counsel for the building itself. And as I think of how this is going to work for us, I think it makes sense to me that as part of that welcome package that you or somebody brings, that some of the leaders of this church should be there too. In other words, what they would be doing, they would be mainly is to get to know their new neighbors, but secondly, listen to what the neighbors are wanting. And if the neighbors are saying, we want a book study, or if they're saying, we want to organize about racism, we'd say, well, that's fine, we do too, so we'll do it together.
Yeah, I guess that's a good segue to the other part of the conversation. So I've been talking about the 15 people experiencing homelessness, but part of the plan is to have a person who is in, we don't have a name for it yet, resident engagement, resident connections, those kind of things. So that person's job, they're going to be on site 40 hours a week. So actually we were talking with Sarah Olson about the office for that just this week. And that person is going to be tasked with both providing some services to some of the families, doing some basic referrals, resources, that kind of stuff for anybody that's in the building, but also with building community amongst the residents, and with the greater community. So we have been thinking and planning about, okay, we can't really do anything until people move in, and part of it is really understanding what the needs are and what people want. At one of our other buildings where there was resident engagement person on site, how it works is we have a resident council, it's completely resident led. We give them, we have money set aside in the budget. We say you have, I think it's $8,000 a year, this is your budget, you decide what you want to spend that money on. And they plan events, engagement activities. So I could see that being a really good connection where we can invite folks from Calvary in too, if wanted, on those things. So some of the things that group does is they have cooking classes. So we buy the food, we bring in, pay somebody to come in and teach like basic, good recipes that are cheaper, like how do you cook on a budget, that kind of stuff. They do a movie night, that's a big thing. They do bingo, that's a huge thing. I don't know what it is about bingo. It's simple. I have a staff person that's like, I'm never gonna do another bingo ever again. She's like, I'm off. I think they do a book group. Lots of times we'll do things where we'll figure out what people's particular talents are. So one of our buildings, we had somebody that was a talented watercolor artist, and so he taught people how to do watercolor. So we'll often try to get people who are living there to teach other people. We have a woman who did a dream dream catcher
Mm-hmm.
training and taught the other women how to do dream catchers. So those are the kinds of things that we envision this person being kind of liaison to do that.
So I imagine the broader community being engaged in that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'd be interested if that's
Because
something.
one of the connections is with Calvary in the community is the Chicago Fire Arts Center, and they're right there on the square, and they've really engaged with the community a lot in doing community projects, and they're building a beautiful sculpture that's going to be at the Calvary Apartments, and so they may be another like really great partner.
Yeah, I mean, we really see it as we don't want to impose anything on people, so I can see some of the residents there saying like, I really want to get involved in the square, I want to do things, and I can see some people saying, I want to go to my apartment. And
Sure.
so we kind of, after you experience, especially after you experience homelessness, sometimes you just want to go and shut that door,
Sure.
and not see anybody for the first 6 months or a year or whatever, and just have a safe place to be. So we kind of see people take them where they are on their journey, and for some people,
Do you
never
know-
engage. Some
Do you know
people-
where those 15 units are going to be? Is it going to be in the new, the old?
I don't know where they're gonna
Okay.
be. I think they're gonna be spread.
Okay.
That's usually, we usually request that they're not all in the same spot. So
Sure. Okay.
don't feel like, oh, that's the homeless unit. or
Gotcha.
that's the-
Oh, Scott.
In the past, Calvary has had like a big, kind of not a yard sale, but big sale. Is there, do you think, I think it would be helpful if you would let us know some of the things that you might need for the houses and apartments, whatever, like, hey, dishes or certain size clothes, or, you can take whatever, and give us a list kind of like that, so some of us can be mindful of that as we keep it onto it for the fall instead of getting rid of it this summer. Those kind of things, because that can easily happen. You just, I just gave it all away last week.
Yeah.
Don't say anything.
Yeah, this is making me think that I need to.
There's some parental child things going on in this meeting today.
Yeah, I guess we're in the middle of it.
No, but I'm just saying, we want to help out, and we haven't had that sale for several years, so there are probably more things that you've outgrown. I mean, whether it's kids' toys or kids' furniture, different things like that too that you outgrow.
Yeah, this is making me think, so we had talked about having we have a really great volunteer director who is fabulous. We talked about having her do kind of a training on, how volunteers work kind of in our other programs, just so that we can kind of get on the same page. But one of the things that probably would be a good idea is for me to have a conversation with her about how do we coordinate some of these things so that we have one place to go, and maybe just set up a system in some place.
Let's see. Scott.
I'm wondering what history around supporting undocumented residents in spaces like this. We had asked Trellis at the very beginning about whether any of this, whether they support or are able to support undocumented folks to be residents, and because Section 8 doesn't allow for that. But I'm wondering, because you've done resident services and support, what history you might have that might be supportive of our undocumented
It's a
neighbors.
huge challenge for us, for our community. As I said, we run a shelter. We have 70 individuals that stay there, and we serve a lot of undocumented folks in our shelter. We've had a long time commitment because of our location to have people on staff that are bilingual at all times, and so it's kind of become the shelter of choice for people that don't speak English, in particular Spanish, and so we have a lot of undocumented folks, and it is really hard to find resources for housing for them because most of the sort of funding is federally based. Anytime we get a state-based funding source, we're trying to target that for people that are undocumented because the state doesn't make us ask those questions, which is great. So it's a challenge for our shelter staff. We're trying to figure out how do we get people out of our shelter. We have people that have stayed a really long time because there's no option for them. The Section 8, as far as I know it, is it's definitely federal. The way we've been able to get families into Section 8 in the past is if they have a child that's documented or has, so sometimes as long as one member is, so I know we serve some families that have gotten in kind of through that back door, which is great. This housing support funding, it's unfortunately people have to have a case open with the county, which means there's federal money involved. So to answer that question, it's a huge need, we need it, and the funding sources that are available for these deeply affordable housing projects don't allow us to do that. Even on our own building that we're building, and we have so many undocumented folks, we can't make it work. It's been a really huge, actually, source of frustration for us.
So because Calvary is a deeply affordable unit, right, complex, I guess, it would not, people who are undocumented would not be eligible to stay here.
I don't
Pretty
think
much by
so.
rule.
I know, when I talk to the MPHA, when I go back with Trellis, I should have brought a piece of paper to take notes today, but hey, you've got this. So I can go back, but I've got a bit of good memory, so I'm gonna go back and write some things down, but I will ask that question of MPHA again, what options might be. I know for the housing support, it's not.
When that question's come up with Trellis staff before, I know they very disappointedly said that they didn't really see a path with their current understanding of what they're allowed to do to house undocumented individuals, and just I think a limitation based on the funding and other things.
Yeah.
If I can jump in to ask a question too, Wendy, obviously this is a group that's really enthusiastic about wanting to help and wanting to be an asset in some of your recent comments we're hearing about like needs that are unmet and other things. As someone who's been in this work for quite a long time, what advice would you have for us to be in this race for the long term?
Mm-hmm.
How do we be allies and be supportive and also recognize that our capacity will never be able to meet every need, and how do we
Yeah, I mean, I think
persist in this long?
that's a very good question, because I think that's something that, as Simpson has been working on our anti-racism journey as well. There's this push and pull between how much do we give and, buying stuff and giving people, and how much do we engage in relationship and helping, not creating a dependence. So I think that is the piece that we are working on, and I think Calvary will be a really good place to work on that. I think we're gonna need to help people when they move in initially, and I think then it's gonna have to be a lot of good relationship building and being present and figuring out ways in which we can engage residents and with Calvary folks if Calvary folks want to, and if people in the building want to. So creating those opportunities for relationship building, and I think we don't want to set up a system in which we're giving to people. I think that what we've heard from our participants who we've worked for a long time in the last few years, as we've really examined our own racism, is you created a dependence on it, you made me dependent on you because you came out and you gave me stuff all the time instead of helping me to figure out how I get that on my own. And so we've been asking ourselves a lot of hard questions. So that's how we're approaching our services differently. And I think with folks that want to be helpful in churches, it's always, that's a big question, and it's a question for us of how do we create a community in which people are empowered to meet their own needs.
That made me think of a question, but I've seen Judy's hand up a little ways away, a little time ago.
I'm just curious as to what kind of staffing is going to be on site, both Trellis and Simpson, and, like 24-hour kind of thing or whatever. And then for Simpson, are you going to also be available to the community members? If community members need assistance, and I'm not exactly sure what.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of the capacity, I'm not sure we could be the like thing for community members because, I mean, honestly, because the community need is so great and we're focused primarily internally on the people that are living in that building and the immediate surroundings. So I don't think I could commit to saying, yeah, we're gonna be open to that. I think we could certainly, if somebody comes in and is like, hey, do you know, comes into the food shelf and our staff person's there and wants assistance with navigating some things, we're gonna do it, but I don't think we can commit to saying like, oh yeah, we'll help everybody at the square or anybody that comes by. The staff person from Simpson, we anticipate is gonna be there like 40 hours a week, so it's primarily gonna be during the week. But then it'll have to be flexible for the needs of the community, so once we figure out what those are, there might be some evening things, there might be some weekend things that are happening, so that person will be there. We'll have an additional kind of part-time staff that's gonna be working with the 9 single individuals, so they'll be on site some as well. So that office we're talking about has 2 desks in it in a little space, so they'll be there. I think you'd have to ask Trellis about when they're gonna be on site. In terms of, I mean, I know we'll have a property manager. I don't know when that property manager will be on. Usually in other projects with them, they're available, they're on site a certain number of hours a week, and we try to coincide with the services so that we're communicating about any things that might be coming in. Usually they have like after hours phone numbers and that kind of stuff, and that's part of what we do with our residents, is helping make sure that they have what they need over, you know, when we're not here, here's the numbers for the emergency maintenance, here's the numbers for COPE, which is a mental health line, here's the numbers for things, you know, give them the tools that they need to solve those crises overnight if needed.
Could I use, I look at this in another little slanted way in terms of who your staff is gonna be. And I said this earlier before when we were playing this thing. We have some staff. We have a pastor, not full-time, but we have a pastor full-time. In my work with hospitals and everything, what I would call him is a chaplain. We have a chaplain that's working for us. We have a part-time administrator that has a lot of skills with things like computers and organization of projects and building maintenance and all that stuff. And he's paid to be in the building. So you got him on site. And now we have a musician that's very part-time, but I think would be very, very good candidate to lead, for example, a community sing-along for anybody in the community. Come and have a sing-along, use the piano that's in there, have a sing-along. Or what Sherry said, what I think is just great, is that we have a history of inviting into our building an urban arts academy. It's not there in that form, but why can't we revive the whole urban arts academy in our new meeting space, not in the church space, but in the meeting space, the big room, and have the help of this local arts center and local artists that may not be members of the church or will ever be members of the church, but give the leadership for it. So then you get that, in a way, you're getting more staff as volunteers.
So I had a thought when Josh was talking about sustainability, and I don't know if it's a good thought or a bad thought, or if this has ever happened in any of your other places, but just wondered about us having a relator from Calvary for each apartment. And if they say leave us alone, we leave them alone. But just like as a way for us to develop relationships and not have like one family have like 5 apartments that they're relating with. You know, so I don't know that maybe that's a thing that could happen. Yeah.
I think it's worth having a conversation about.
Right, and letting them have the lead. Right.
I think that's
Let him have the lead, and we're not here to try to talk you into coming to church with us, but let's be a good neighbor.
Sure. I have like a 2-parter. I'm assuming that the goal for Simpson is to work with the folks that are experiencing the generational homelessness to move into their own place that they can afford and sustain. And then I'm assuming that you all will be involved in moving new people into the ones that are, you know, where they've experienced homelessness and they're just like, for now, getting their first place. So is that correct? You're gonna, I mean, you see this trellis will be there because they own the building. Do you think you guys will be in an ongoing relationship with helping those folks that have gone out and then to bring in new folks
Oh,
to?
yeah, especially for the units for people experiencing homelessness, yeah, that's our job. So
Yeah.
our job is to move people in, and really, the idea would be that at some point, because this housing support comes with, you know, it's not as independent as what we want people to have. So our job is to build skills, and hopefully eventually they'll move out of Calvary. We talked to Trellis about if there's room in the Section 8, if somebody still wants to stay there, can we get them on the list so that they could just move within the building, or even just stay in their unit and get a Section 8. So we've done that in other buildings. But often it's like, yeah, I'm ready to move out, I got a job, or, you know, whatever it is to kind of keep moving on.
Okay.
And I mentioned people will move out of the other units as well. Things
Yeah.
change. Nothing's
My other question that I had, and maybe not a question, but something I asked of Simpson Housing, when we first were talking about what we're doing with Trellis and what's gonna happen at the very beginning, Simpson Housing was there, giving us, you know, what they would be doing and some things. We also talked about some training sessions for us as a congregation, and I know that was really big for you, Felicia, that I as a church, as a religious organization, we tend to say, how can I help you? And make some really bad mistakes and turn people off. And so I'm wondering if that is still a possibility to have those trainings so that we aren't stumbling over our own feet and going back to 1970 and, you know, save everybody and come back to reality a little bit.
Yeah, that's exactly the conversation Felicia and Sherry and I had, whatever that was. On
Yeah.
Zoom. Time is relative. And like I said, we have a great volunteer director. She's developed these trainings. She's done trainings on like white saviorism and those kinds of things. So I think that's something we could absolutely. We talked about needed to figure out how we could do that. Like, would it be at this forum? She's a mom, so it's harder to get her on a Sunday morning.
Yeah, so we're planning to have a session in July and a session in August.
Okay.
And we talked about potentially having the volunteer coordinator come in and do a training with us to help with some things.
I know, because it's hard with the, you know, that was our building.
Yeah,
It's not our building.
right.
We are a tenant.
Yeah.
And how do we get our minds around, we're a tenant, we're not in charge?
Yeah, and I, you know, I caught myself using the wrong language, right?
Yeah.
Like I wanted to talk about being welcoming. It's like, well, it's not my space anymore,
Yeah,
right? So we're
Yeah.
having to switch it. Like, how am I a good neighbor?
yeah. And we're having a hard time with people even now that, okay, this isn't gonna be our building.
Mm-hmm.
This may be where we worship, like if we worship, some churches worship at the park board places.
Yeah, church has to come down at the end of church.
Huh?
Church has to come down at the end of church.
Yeah, so it's
Like everything we
hard
put
for
up and use
people,
during the service, that has to go away.
yeah, it's hard for people to get their mind, even now,
Yeah.
That's
members around that.
That might be that might be a conversation that we have to have internally that Simpson's not gonna be able to help us with.
No, but
That might
Shoot.
involve, that might involve like a psychiatrist or a social worker. That's
Okay,
way beyond Trellis's scope, my mom.
But if we open ourselves up to some training
Oh, sure.
on how
Yeah.
we become a good tenant.
Right.
Right, how do
And
we?
as Sherry said, a good neighbor.
And I'm trying to remember, so, we talked, there's imagination grants available. I'm looking at Felicia, cause she knows more about this than I do.
Yes, that has closed.
Oh, shoot.
June 1st was the deadline, but I might have it in.
Oh,
I
okay.
know the people that are making those decisions, right? So, yeah, I mean, there's still opportunity for us to do that, and I've been reaching out to a couple of, I don't know if you know AHA Process. They do a lot of, yeah, Jody, she's not with them anymore, she's her own consultant, has her own firm now, but, they do work with religious organizations on just this whole thing, like generational poverty, generational middle class, generational wealth, how does it show up? How do you move outside of yourself?
Even the idea that many of our neighbors may not even be Christian.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Right? So there's a spot, there's a place where to go back to what Sarah said, a place of uncomfortable, that's not a word, but the discomfort, thank you. There's a place of discomfort in that probably for all of us, of like remembering, yeah, we're Christian, but everybody that we're living with basically may not be. And so there are things that we have to consider about when we use the space. Great, yeah, we can have all of this symbolism up, and yeah, some of it's going to be up because it's the windows and they can't get rid of the windows, right? But we have to be very aware that we're not the only ones that are using this space, and so sometimes our symbolism may not be the symbolism of those who will also be using the space, i.e. a Christmas tree. At Christmas time, folks, we may not have a Christmas tree, because I'm not putting it up and taking it down every Sunday. But that's a real possibility. That's a real possibility, because again, we are sharing space with people who are different from us, and we have to keep that in mind every single day. And we don't want to make others uncomfortable.
And our worships may look really different,
And our worships may look very different.
I went to Emmanuel Lutheran Church in Seattle last week, and they served unhoused people, right? They act as a shelter, and there's kids running around, and it was great, but that's a little different than what we're used to, right?
Correct. Everything is going to be different.
Everything's going to be.
Believe it or not, things are changing and have changed, and they will continue to change as we become comfortable with our neighbors and in that space. And that's just a reality that Calvary's facing. And
we chose it though.
We chose it, but I don't think there are some people who quite realize that we are on this roller coaster and we are about to go over the edge. So
okay, that's kind of
it's true.
That's what I say we, right?
That's when the
I'm sorry, I'm not mixing words anymore. Things are going to be different.
Yeah.
And you have to get your mind wrapped around that.
Yeah. I'm excited for it.
Yeah, me too. I'm really excited for it.
Yeah.
So.
Can I have a quick question? So, we are saying Calvary Apartments. What's it gonna be called? What should we call it?
It's so funny, I just asked that same question of Trellis because I was working on a grant to try to get some money for the engagement stuff, and they said it hasn't changed, it's still Calvary Apartments.
What? Really?
Yeah.
It's a placeholder. They, at least as
Okay.
far as I understand it, Trellis has hired a branding consultant that's going to be doing branding exercises. I think they probably, it's what you do. It's there are good reasons to do it, even if they go through that process and decide that Calvary Apartments is what it should be called. The process has value, but anyway, it's been a little while since I checked in on that, but my understanding was that they were planning to do that. It would involve, input from Calvary community, but input from the broader community, hoping to have Calvary folks help to leverage some of that potentially. So there could be a role for Calvary folks in that work as well, but we should not assume that the name is finalized or even that Calvary will be in it.
try to live there, and if they're starting that Section 8 voucher process, like knowing what to call it.
Right.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, Dan has said Calvary Apartments, right, as a placeholder. So I am seeing that it is high noon. Do we want to have like?
Can I just ask one last question?
Sure.
Or maybe,
I didn't get that. Could you try?
No, I just wanted to reflect back. Like, I think we're having this conversation here is really helpful. Of like, what kind of culture are we going to build, either intentionally or unintentionally, with how we come back to the space? How do we build relationship? And like, how do we be kind and generous neighbors in terms of like stepping up and like jumping in where there are needs, but not having that like we're meeting needs be the like entire charism of the relationship. And I just got really excited by what you were talking about in terms of like how the staff will like look for and create opportunities for like the gifts and assets of those moving in to lead in different ways. And so I'm curious what that looks like for us as Calvary to like come alongside and participate and help with that, like uplifting and relationship building. And think that, yeah, it's clear that we've got like work to do of what it's going to mean for us to come back into the space in a very different way, like as a part of that whole like what culture are we building here kind of conversation. So I don't know, that's more of like an observation than an actual question. Like I think we get to like, what does that look like in terms of how do we collaborate on programming, but I think also more urgently, like how are we going to step in? And like just a few months feels like very soon already. Right. So I guess it's like both a question of like how do we keep this like conversation and door open, and how does Calvary folks like we have our conversations about culture and next steps and training, or you know how do we like set up to be relators, or how do we want to like structure and like get ourselves ready for some of this stuff. So.
And I mean, yeah, and I think we don't plan to stop in September, right? But we just had the next like couple months scheduled.
Yeah.
Last question.
Okay, I would like to know, I've constantly been hearing about 42 units. How many warm bodies? How many people? Is there projected, estimating how many people in all that will be there?
Yeah,
You know?
I think I'd need to look at what the mix is again, which I could send it to you all.
Okay.
Because I know I have it, because I was working on this grant. So, I mean, if there's 42 units, yeah, there's probably
But there must be
closer
a
to
ceiling
90.
at the max you can have.
Yeah,
roughly, or-
I'm gonna guess it's gotta be closer to 90 people you'd see it there, with some of the 2 bedrooms and 4 bedrooms and, and children, which is a lovely location right across from the park, and, there's just so many good things about it. So I imagine it's to be continued, and hopefully it'll be not just me all the time, because my staff person Janelle, who's our director of family programs, she was not able to be here today, but she would love to engage. And then we'll have a program manager that we think will be a lovely gentleman called Leroy, who will be, supervising the team there. So more to come. I think we'll have to figure out how it's planning and then making new plans once people move in.
Yeah, Wendy, thank you so much for coming.